The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mixture of languages, cliques, and harmonics as representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered for what many believed would be humanity's final hearing. Ambassador Sarah sat alone at the human delegation table, her weathered hands folded calmly despite the hostile stares directed her way from across the vast amphitheater. "The floor recognizes Ambassador of the Hegemony," announced the council speaker, a towering crystalline being whose voice resonated through universal translators. The reptilian hegemony representative slithered to the central podium, his scales gleaming under the chamber's harsh lights. "Esteemed council members, we gather today to address the human threat once and for all. These primitives have been allowed to spread across 17 star systems, establishing colonies and military bases with alarming speed." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Ambassador remained motionless, though her jaw tightened imperceptibly. "The humans claim they seek only peaceful coexistence," continued, his forked tongue flicking between words. "Yet they refuse to submit to proper hegemony oversight. They build ships they claim are for exploration and defense, but we know better. They are preparing for expansion, for conquest." A six-armed delegate from the collective chittered its support. "The humans have ignored 14 formal requests to limit their fleet size. They show no respect for established galactic order. Furthermore," his voice grew more venomous, "they have the audacity to maintain what they call museum ships. Ancient vessels they claim hold historical significance. We all know these are merely disguised weapons platforms, kept ready for surprise attacks." Laughter echoed through the chamber, though it sounded more like a collection of growls, chirps, and electronic static through the translators. The idea that humanity's old, obsolete vessels could pose any threat to modern galactic powers struck the assembled delegates as absurd. Ambassador finally stood, her voice cutting through the mockery. "May I respond to these accusations?" The speaker's crystalline form shifted colors, indicating reluctant permission. "The floor recognizes the human representative." Walked to the podium with steady steps, her gray hair catching the lights. At 73, she had served as humanity's primary diplomatic voice for over 2 decades, watching as Earth's children spread to the stars only to face increasing hostility from established powers. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "The hegemony speaks of threat, yet humanity has never fired the first shot in any conflict. We have defended ourselves when attacked, yes, but we have never been the aggressors." Lies hissed from his seat. "Your species' history is one of endless warfare." "Our history is one of growth through adversity," replied firmly. "Yes, we fought among ourselves before we reached the stars, but those struggles taught us valuable lessons about unity, about the cost of conflict, and about the strength that comes from standing together when faced with extinction." She activated a holographic display showing images of Earth's museums. Ancient aircraft hung from ceilings, old tanks sat in careful displays, and naval vessels rested in permanent berths. "You mock our museum ships, calling them disguised weapons, but you misunderstand their true purpose. These vessels represent our journey, our evolution as a species. They remind us where we came from and what we've overcome." "Pretty words," sneered a delegate from the Empire, its metallic voice grating through the translator. "But the Council grows tired of human expansion. You spread like a virus, establishing footholds wherever you go." "We establish communities," corrected. "We terraform dead worlds, build stations in empty space, and create homes for our children. We don't conquer inhabited systems or displace existing populations." "You don't need to," interjected. "Your very presence changes the balance of power in each region. Your ships patrol routes that have been under hegemony protection for centuries." The truth of the matter hung unspoken in the air. Humanity's rapid expansion hadn't been driven by conquest, but by necessity. Earth's population had reached critical levels, and the discovery of faster-than-light travel had offered a solution. But their success in establishing thriving colonies had disrupted ancient territorial agreements between the established powers. "The hegemony offers one final opportunity for peaceful resolution," announced, returning to the podium. "Humanity will restrict itself to its current 17 systems. All colonial fleets will be disbanded. All military vessels will be surrendered to hegemony forces for inspection and disposal. The museum ships will be scrapped immediately." The chamber fell silent. Every delegate understood the implications. Accept, and humanity would become a vassal state, trapped in a small corner of the galaxy. Refuse and face the combined might of the hegemony and its allies. Looked out at the assembled representatives, seeing the mixture of anticipation and bloodlust in their various features. They expected humanity to submit or be crushed. She thought of the colonies scattered across human space, millions of families who had built new lives among the stars. She thought of the exploration fleets pushing ever outward, seeking new worlds and new possibilities. And she thought of the museum ships, those ancient vessels that served as monuments to human ingenuity and determination. "Ambassador," the speaker prompted, "the Council requires an answer." She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at. "The United Earth Alliance respectfully declines the hegemony's generous offer." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien sounds expressing shock, anger, and excitement. Some delegates had hoped for submission, others had wanted an excuse for war. Now they would have their conflict. "So be it," Scales darkened with satisfaction. "The hegemony Grand Fleet will depart within the solar cycle. Humanity has chosen extinction." As the session dissolved into chaos, gathered her materials and walked toward the exit. A younger human aide, David Park, fell into step beside her. "Ma'am, was that wise? The hegemony fleet is massive. Our colonial forces are spread thin across 17 systems." Paused at the chamber doors and looked back at the celebrating delegates. "David, do you know what those aliens don't understand about humanity?" "Ma'am, they think our museum ships are just old junk. They see obsolete technology and assume weakness." She smiled grimly. "They've never had to fight for survival the way we have. They've never had to make do with less, to innovate under pressure, to turn desperate measures into devastating advantages." As they walked through the corridors of the council station, activated her quantum communicator. The encrypted signal would reach every human colony and outpost within hours. "This is Ambassador to all Allied forces. The hegemony has declared war on humanity. All museum ships are to be immediately recommissioned. Repeat, all museum ships are authorized for active duty." David stared at her in confusion. "Ma'am, those ships are centuries old. Their technology is completely outdated." "Their technology is proven," corrected. "Every system on those vessels was tested in the fires of real combat. Every design was refined through generations of conflict. The aliens have grown soft, dependent on their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers. They've forgotten that sometimes the old ways work best." Throughout human space, ancient vessels that had rested in orbital museums and planetary displays suddenly hummed with renewed life. Volunteer crews, many of them veterans who had served on similar ships in their youth, began powering up systems that hadn't been active in decades. In the Sol system, the battleship Missouri, a massive nuclear-powered vessel from humanity's early space expansion period, began warming its fusion reactors. Around B, the carrier Yorktown started launching maintenance drones to check its vintage fighter bays. At the colony, the destroyer Ajax ran diagnostics on weapon systems that used solid projectiles instead of energy beams. The hegemony Grand Fleet was already mobilizing, confident in their technological superiority and numerical advantage. Their ships boasted plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and shield systems that could deflect most known weapons. Their crews were professionals, trained in the finest military academies in the galaxy. But as the ancient human vessels prepared for war, their crews remembered lessons learned in desperate battles against impossible odds. They remembered that victory didn't always go to the strongest or the most advanced. Sometimes it went to the most determined, the most creative, and the most willing to sacrifice everything for the survival of their species. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity's ancestors had known for. Never underestimate the power of experience, desperation, and the unbreakable will to survive. The museum ships were coming, and they carried with them the accumulated wisdom of every battle humanity had ever fought. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Missouri, watching his crew work with practiced efficiency around him. At 68, he had been retired for 5 years when the call came. His weathered hands gripped the command rail as status reports flowed in from across the human fleet. "Sir, the hegemony advance force has entered the system," reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah from the communications station. 300 vessels, standard hegemony formation. "Any word from our colonies?" "All civilian populations have been evacuated to the inner planets. Colonial defense forces are falling back to predetermined positions. Nodded grimly. The hegemony had chosen as their opening move humanity's oldest and most established colony outside the Sol system. If they could take quickly, it would demoralize human resistance and provide a staging ground for attacks on other systems. Fleet status, asked his tactical officer. 47 museum ships are operational and moving to intercept. The Yorktown battle group is 2 hours behind us. The Ajax squadron is moving to flank from the asteroid belt. Smiled despite the situation. 47 ships against 300 seemed like impossible odds to any reasonable military mind. But these weren't reasonable circumstances, and the human crews manning these ancient vessels weren't operating under normal parameters. Communications, patch me through to all ships. Channel open, sir. Activated the fleet-wide frequency, his voice carrying to every human vessel converging on the system. This is Admiral to all Allied forces. In approximately 6 hours, we will engage the Hegemony Advance Fleet. They outnumber us 7-1. Their ships are faster, more advanced, and better armed by conventional standards. He paused, looking out at the stars where his fleet was gathering. Ships that had been museum pieces that morning were now accelerating toward battle, their crews working frantically to remember procedures some hadn't used in decades. But we have advantages they don't understand. Every system on our ships was built to work when everything else failed. Every weapon was designed to fire when the power was failing and the hull was breached. Our ancestors fought in ships like these when defeat meant extinction, and they won. On the bridge of the Hegemony flagship Dominator, Fleet Commander studied the tactical display with growing amusement. The human vessels were approaching in loose formations that seemed almost primitive compared to Hegemony precision. Commander, the human ships are transmitting on multiple frequencies, reported his communications officer. They appear to be coordinating some kind of battle plan. Let them coordinate. His mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. Their ancient vessels won't survive the first salvo from our plasma batteries. Signal all ships to prepare for engagement. We'll end this quickly and move on to the next human system. The two fleets met in the space between and its outermost planet, a region that had seen only peaceful merchant traffic for decades. The Hegemony ships moved in perfect formation, their energy shields glowing with power, their weapons charging for a devastating first strike. The human museum ships looked almost pitiful by comparison. The Missouri, flagship of the human force, was a massive but clearly outdated battleship whose thick armor plating and crude-looking weapon turrets seemed laughably primitive. The other vessels in the human fleet ranged from ancient carriers to small destroyers, all bearing the scars and patches of their long service. All ships, this is Dominator, fire at will. The space between the fleets erupted in brilliant streams of plasma and quantum energy. The Hegemony's opening barrage was devastating, designed to cripple or destroy the human fleet in the first exchange. But the human ships didn't react as expected. Instead of trying to match the Hegemony vessels in a traditional energy weapon duel, they scattered in seemingly random directions, their formations breaking apart in what appeared to be panic. Target the flagship, ordered. Concentrate fire on the Missouri. Multiple plasma beams converged on the ancient battleship, striking its hull with enough energy to vaporize a modern cruiser. The Missouri's shields flared and failed almost immediately, and the plasma burned through sections of its outer armor. But the ship kept coming. Impossible, muttered the Hegemony tactical officer. Those hits should have destroyed their primary systems. What the Hegemony crews didn't understand was that the Missouri had been built for a different kind of warfare. Its systems were redundant beyond any modern ship's capabilities, designed to function even when primary power failed. The plasma that had burned through its outer hull had struck armor that was meant to absorb and deflect kinetic impacts, not energy weapons. But beneath that armor lay backup systems, emergency power conduits, and manual controls that could keep the ship fighting even when its main computers were offline. Bring us about, ordered calmly, ignoring the damage reports flooding in. All batteries load solid shot, target their flagship. The Missouri's main guns were relics from an earlier era of space combat, massive magnetic accelerators that fired dense metal projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. The hegemony had discontinued such primitive weapons centuries ago in favor of more efficient energy systems. They had forgotten how devastating simple kinetic energy could be. The Missouri's first salvo struck the Dominator's shields with the force of multiple asteroid impacts. The energy barriers, designed to deflect plasma and quantum torpedoes, crumpled under the primitive but overwhelming kinetic force. The solid metal projectiles punched through the flagship's hull like it was made of paper. "What just happened?" demanded as his ship shuddered under the impact. "The humans are using kinetic projectiles, sir. Our shields aren't configured to stop that type of weapon." Across the battlefield, other museum ships were employing equally unexpected tactics. The carrier Yorktown had launched not sleek energy fighters, but ancient atmospheric craft retrofitted with space capability. The aging fighters were slow and clumsy compared to modern designs, but they carried nuclear warheads instead of energy weapons. The hegemony point defense systems, calibrated to intercept fast-moving energy projectiles, couldn't adjust quickly enough to target the slower but more numerous human fighters. Nuclear explosions began blossoming against hegemony hulls as the vintage bombers delivered their deadly cargo. The destroyer Ajax had closed to what the hegemony considered impossibly close range, its ancient hull by energy weapon impacts, but still functional. At point-blank range, it began firing what appeared to be simple chemical explosives. "Sir, the human ships are using primitive chemical warheads," reported a hegemony tactical officer. "Our analysis indicates simple nuclear fission devices." "Those weapons are centuries obsolete," replied. "They should barely scratch our hulls." But the nuclear warheads weren't designed to penetrate advanced armor. They were designed to create electromagnetic pulses that fried electronic systems. The hegemony ships, dependent on sophisticated computer networks and energy-based systems, began experiencing cascading failures as their circuits overloaded. Admiral watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction as the hegemony formation began to collapse. Their advanced ships were powerful, but they had been designed to fight other advanced ships. They weren't prepared for the crude, simple, overwhelming force that the museum ships brought to bear. "Sir, enemy flagship is losing power," reported his tactical officer. "Multiple hegemony vessels are reporting system failures." "Press the attack. Signal all ships to close range and finish them." The museum ships, their armor and their systems damaged but still functional, moved in for the kill. The hegemony crews, trained in precise, technological warfare, found themselves helpless against enemies who fought like barbarians, but with the skill and determination of veterans. As the Dominator's systems failed and its hull began to breach in multiple locations, Fleet Commander finally understood what they were facing. These weren't just old ships crewed by desperate humans. These were weapons forged in the crucible of species survival, refined through generations of desperate conflict, and crewed by beings who remembered what it meant to fight with their backs against the wall. The battle ended with the complete destruction of the hegemony advance fleet. Not a single alien vessel escaped to report back to their commanders. The museum ships had suffered casualties, several ancient vessels lost to enemy fire, but they had achieved something that should have been impossible. As the human fleet began recovery operations, Admiral opened a channel to the scattered colonies throughout human space. "This is Admiral to all Allied forces. The enemy advance fleet has been destroyed, but this is only the beginning. The hegemony will send their main fleet next, and they won't underestimate us again." He paused, looking out at the debris field that had once been 300 of the galaxy's most advanced warships. "Signal all museum ships throughout human space. We're going to need every vessel, every crew, and every weapon our ancestors ever built. The real war is just beginning." The emergency session of the Hegemony War Council convened on the fortress world of, deep within the Empire's most secure system. The massive chamber, carved from solid stone and reinforced with energy barriers, had hosted strategic planning for 1,000 years of galactic conquest. High Admiral, Supreme Commander of the Hegemony's military forces, studied the holographic display showing the complete destruction of Fleet Commander's advance force. 300 ships, including some of the most advanced vessels in the galaxy, had been reduced to radioactive debris by what appeared to be antique human warships. "Explain to me." His voice carried the authority of someone who had conquered 17 species. How primitive kinetic weapons defeated our plasma shield technology. The chief tactical analyst, a nervous from the collective, clicked his mandibles rapidly before responding. High Admiral, the human weapons appear to utilize simple physical projectiles accelerated to extreme velocities. Our shield systems were designed to deflect energy-based attacks. The kinetic force of solid matter at such speeds overwhelmed our defensive capabilities. And their fighters carried nuclear warheads. Crude fission devices, yes, but delivered in sufficient quantity to cause massive electromagnetic disruption of our fleet's electronic systems. Slammed one of her forearms against the council table, her exoskeleton crackling with barely controlled fury. These humans fight like savages. No civilized species has used such primitive tactics in centuries. Perhaps, offered the strategic advisor cautiously, that is precisely why they were effective. Our forces train against modern threats using contemporary tactics. No one prepared for warfare methods that predate the Galactic Compact. The High Admiral turned to study a detailed analysis of human military history that her intelligence teams had compiled. The data was sobering. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire recorded history, developing increasingly sophisticated methods of destroying each other until they finally achieved interstellar capability. Even their museum ships represented evolutionary peaks of destructive efficiency. How many of these museum vessels do they possess? Intelligence estimates over 2,000 ships of various classes, High Admiral. Most are distributed across their 17 colonial systems, though the largest concentrations appear to be in the Sol system and around their major colonies. 2,000 ships. Even accounting for the primitive nature of their technology, that represented a significant threat if handled properly. And clearly, the humans knew how to handle their antique weapons very well indeed. Assemble the Grand Fleet, commanded. Every available vessel, every allied contingent. We will not make the mistake of underestimating these primitives again. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, Admiral stood before a gathering of the most experienced military officers humanity could assemble. The conference room aboard the lunar base was packed with men and women who had come out of retirement to crew museum ships, along with active duty personnel from humanity's colonial defense forces. The hegemony response will be massive, began, activating a tactical display that showed intelligence estimates of enemy fleet movements. Our sources indicate they're mobilizing everything they have. We're looking at 5,000 ships, maybe more. A murmur of concern rippled through the assembled officers. Captain, commanding the museum ship Enterprise, raised her hand. Sir, even with every museum ship operational, we barely have 2,000 vessels. The odds are more than 2 to 1. Worse than that, added Colonel James Harrison, who led the vintage fighter squadrons. Their ships are faster and have longer-range weapons. They'll try to engage us at maximum distance where our kinetic weapons are less effective. Nodded grimly, which is why we're not going to fight the battle they expect. We're going to use the one advantage they can't counter. We know this galaxy better than they do. He manipulated the display to show the major shipping routes and gravitational phenomena throughout human space. The hegemony thinks in terms of traditional fleet actions, ship-to-ship combat in open space, but we're not going to give them that battle. Over the following weeks, museum ships throughout human space began implementing what would later be called the Archaic Protocol. Instead of massing for a traditional fleet engagement, the ancient vessels dispersed to carefully chosen positions throughout the galaxy. Some ships took up residence in asteroid fields, where their thick armor and redundant systems would provide advantages in close-quarters fighting. Others positioned themselves near spatial anomalies like neutron stars and black holes, where the massive gravitational fields would disrupt the advanced targeting systems of hegemony ships. The heavy carriers loaded their fighters not with standard combat aircraft, but with converted mining vessels, industrial haulers, and even civilian shuttles retrofitted with nuclear warheads. The destroyers and cruisers stockpiled solid ammunition manufactured in orbital factories that hadn't produced kinetic weapons in 2 centuries. Most importantly, the museum ships began networking with civilian infrastructure throughout human space. Merchant vessels provided intelligence on enemy movements. Mining stations offered resupply and repair facilities. Even passenger liners were pressed into service as hospital ships and evacuation craft. When the Hegemony Grand Fleet finally arrived at the edge of human space, they found none of the massed resistance they had expected. Instead, long-range scouts reported that human space appeared almost defenseless, with only scattered patrol vessels visible on sensors. "Where are their museum ships?" High Admiral demanded. "Unknown, High Admiral. Our sensors detect minimal military activity in most human systems. They appear to have withdrawn their forces." "A trap, obviously, but no matter. We'll sweep each system methodically and destroy whatever forces we encounter." The Grand Fleet divided into multiple task forces, each larger than the advance fleet that had been destroyed at. They began moving into human space with overwhelming confidence, expecting to crush whatever resistance remained. The first sign that something was wrong came when Task Force 7 entered the asteroid belt around the mining colony of New Pittsburgh. The dense field of rocks and metallic debris should have provided cover for human forces, but initial scans revealed nothing. Then the asteroids themselves began firing. The museum ship Bismarck had been anchored to a massive iron asteroid, its hull camouflaged with mining equipment and ore processing machinery. When the Hegemony Task Force moved within range, the ancient battleship's main guns opened fire from what appeared to be a harmless chunk of space rock. The kinetic projectiles, accelerated by the battleship's magnetic launchers and aided by the asteroid's gravity, struck the lead Hegemony vessel with devastating force. The impact was so powerful it actually altered the task force's formation as ships moved to avoid the expanding debris field. Before the Hegemony forces could respond, more asteroids revealed themselves to be disguised human ships. The mining colony's industrial facilities began launching converted ore haulers loaded with nuclear warheads, while civilian vessels that had appeared to be fleeing the system suddenly reversed course and began ramming attacks. Similar ambushes erupted throughout human space. Task forces entering seemingly empty systems found themselves under attack from disguised stations, modified civilian craft, and museum ships using tactics that had been obsolete for centuries, but remained devastatingly effective. The Hegemony's advanced sensors, designed to detect energy signatures and sophisticated cloaking technology, couldn't distinguish between actual asteroids and human ships covered in metallic ore. Their targeting computers, programmed to track fast-moving energy projectiles, couldn't effectively engage slow-moving kinetic weapons fired from unexpected angles. Most critically, their command structure, built around centralized coordination and technological superiority, began breaking down under the chaos of asymmetric warfare. Fleet commanders who had trained for precise tactical engagements found themselves fighting 100 separate battles against enemies who refused to follow established military doctrine. Admiral, commanding the museum fleet from a disguised command center built into a hollowed-out comet, watched the tactical displays with growing satisfaction. "Status report from all sectors. Task Forces 4 through 9 have taken heavy casualties," reported his intelligence officer. "They're beginning to withdraw from advanced positions. Task Force 2 has lost over half its vessels to the minefield we laid around the colony." The minefields were another innovation that caught the Hegemony completely off guard. Human engineers had taken ancient naval mines, devices that hadn't been used in space warfare for centuries, and modified them with modern detection systems. The Hegemony's energy shields provided no protection against weapons that simply exploded when ships passed nearby, filling space with clouds of metal fragments that shredded hulls and destroyed sensitive equipment. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from High Admiral. She's requesting immediate negotiations." Smiled grimly. The proud Hegemony, which had demanded humanity's surrender just months earlier, was now asking to talk. "Put her through." His image appeared on the main screen, her exoskeleton showing signs of battle damage. Behind her, the bridge of her flagship was clearly operating on emergency power. "Admiral, I propose an immediate ceasefire." "I'm listening." "Your forces have exceeded our expectations. The Hegemony is prepared to recognize human territorial claims and establish formal diplomatic relations." Studied the alien commander for a long moment. "And our museum ships will be respected as legitimate military assets." "Thank you, High Admiral, but I'm afraid we have additional terms." The negotiations that followed established humanity as a major power in galactic politics. The museum ships, once mocked as obsolete relics, became symbols of human ingenuity and determination. More importantly, they served as reminders to the galaxy's established powers that sometimes the old ways of doing things were still the best ways. Years later, military academies throughout the galaxy would study the museum ship war as a perfect example of how innovation, adaptability, and determination could overcome overwhelming technological advantages. The ancient human vessels, with their crude weapons and primitive systems, had proven that in warfare, as in life, experience and creativity often mattered more than raw power. And in the museums of humanity's growing interstellar civilization, new exhibits appeared alongside the restored warships. They told the story of how humanity's past had secured its future, and how the wisdom of previous generations had made possible the dreams of those yet to come.